the UK, Vancouver, Cleveland, White Rock here in BC. Excellent. Wow, we've got a real international crowd this morning. Love to see that. Um, we'll just, again, if you're just joining us now, we'll just give it a couple minutes for people to trickle in this morning. Feel free to post where you're joining from in the chat. And we are so excited to see you all here. Hi, Allie from East Van. Thanks for being here. Got somebody from North Carolina. That's amazing. Bay Area. I'll just maybe give it a minute or so more. If you're just joining us, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy that you're giving your Saturday morning or afternoon or whatever time it may be where you're joining us from. All right, I think we can get started here. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dylan. I'm a librarian on the Arts and Culture team for the Vancouver Public Library, and I will be your host today. My colleague Jorge is also working on this event, and he'll be in the background making sure that everything runs smoothly. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'm a settler in these lands, which means I feel a responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism in the place I call home, and to take sincere actions towards decolonization, especially in my work as a public servant. If you're joining us from another part of the country or another part of the world, there's a great resource that Jorge will share in the chat so you can learn about the land where you live. Now, today is very exciting because through the magic of webinars, we are getting to hear a cross-country conversation. We're going to hear from two incredible debut authors who are joining us here in Vancouver, all the way from New York City and Dublin, to talk about their excellent new novels. Those novels are, of course, Idlewild and Henriad, which I recommend everyone go and pick up from your favorite local indie bookstore. We have partnered with a local bookstore here in Vancouver, Upstart and Crow, for this event. So check them out and grab a copy. Jorge will drop a link to where you can buy it online. And let's get into it. I am excited to introduce today's speakers. Alan and James, do you guys join me on stage? Hello, hello. Let me do a little intro for both of you. Alan Bratton was born in the United States. He holds an MA in English Language and Literature, having written a thesis on medieval English kingship. He is the winner of the 2021 Sewanee Review Fiction Contest and was longlisted for the 2021 Deborah Rogers Foundation Writers Award. Henry is his debut novel. And James Frankie Thomas is a novelist, critic, teacher, and lifelong New Yorker. He attended the City College of New York, and the Iowa Writers Workshop. Idlewild is his first book. We are so excited to have you both with us this morning. They're going to have a conversation for about an hour here. If you guys have things you want to talk about in the chat, the attendees, you are welcome to talk to each other. The chat function is there. And with that, let's get this conversation started. Alan, James, take it away.
Hello, thank you for having us on here. Alan, I am just so excited to be talking to you. I know I got to meet you briefly, I guess 2 weeks ago now, but it wasn't long enough. And I have been cyber stalking you ever since your book deal announcement came out, basically. It's such a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, we met each other for like 2 seconds at the Strand, and now we're like really gonna get into the real issues. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be at VPL. I've spent many an hour at VPL in the past, including while I was writing this novel. So I'm glad to kind of be back here virtually and talking to everybody.
Oh, you're so lucky. I have actually never been to Canada at all. So this is the closest I have come so far, zooming in. I would love to visit the VPL one day. So Ellen, I am just such a fan of your book. I keep it by my desk often for reference. Can I ask you the first question? I've just been burning with questions for you ever since, honestly, ever since I read your book. I received this galley last fall, I guess, and I finished reading this book on New Year's Eve. I like to spend New Year's Eve at home listening to the radio because they do a classical countdown. And I didn't do this on purpose. I finished this book at midnight. And at midnight, they always play the listener favorite, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, which was such a nice underscore to the final pages of this book. But if it's all right with you, I would love to get started with one of my biggest questions. Is that okay?
Please go ahead.
All right. So the setting, I guess, the setting of this book is very, very specific. It is the English aristocracy. It's set in modern, well, like 2014, it's set in modern times. So the main character, Hal, is a modern day English aristocrat. Now, forgive me if I am wrong about this. I do not believe you yourself are a member of the English aristocracy. Apologies if I am wrong about that. But you evoke this very alien and foreign and specific world so well, and I am just dying to know how you went about researching this, just like this incredibly foreign to me milieu of aristocrats. And when I went to your Strand event, you talked a bit about like rules of succession and the day-to-day like reality of keeping your stately home in the family, just in a way that made me realize, oh, you have done your research about modern day English aristocracy. I would just love to know how you studied this and what your process was for familiarizing yourself with it in such a way that I would believe that it might have been written by a member of the English aristocracy.
Yeah, well, I mean, the real secret is that Henry was written by a member of the aristocracy because no person from outside of that world can write about it. And so as with Shakespeare, we know that there is a sort of person behind the mask, and then there is the mask. And I am just somebody that the real author of Henry has hired to pretend to be like a normal person who wrote this book so that he wouldn't get so much flack for being like an aristocrat and kind of like airing his family's dirty laundry. So, you know, like, but I'll humor you, and I'll answer this question as if I actually wrote the book. So my kind of journey with the English aristocracy started like over 10 years ago at this point, with like historical fiction set circa like the late 19th, early 20th century. That was really the time period I was interested in. I was really interested in First World War history. And I was like reading everything I could kind of get my hands on from that time period. And so much of it was this kind of overlap between like the kind of middle and upper middle class and then the aristocracy, like think like Virginia Woolf's Orlando. So I was very interested in that social hierarchy of, you know, over 100 years ago now. And slowly I kind of worked my way through the 20th century and into the 21st century. I think when I really started to get interested in the modern English class system was when I studied in London in 2015. And I kind of started realizing like something really, really strange has happened here. You know, people kind of like pretend that the class system is something that has sort of been progressed past, and it hasn't at all. There still is, and the really strange and ironic thing is that like aristocrats themselves are basically obsolete, but the underlying system and the underlying hierarchy is still very much in place, pretty much exactly the way it was, you know, 100, 200 years ago. So I found myself really fascinated by this kind of contradiction between the fact that like nobody knows who aristocrats are now, nobody cares, they don't have an extraordinary amount of political power compared to the people who are actually in government, and at the same time, the hierarchy has like its iron grip still on the whole social fabric of the United Kingdom. So um, I wanted to get into that, and really kind of get my magnifying glass out and inspect what was happening. And the great thing is that aristocrats like love complaining about their lives, and they love kind of like, you know, doing documentaries, a lot of like reality shows, like early 2000s reality shows, where people kind of show up and go like, oh my God, you guys think it's all Downton Abbey and tea parties, but you don't understand how hard my life is. I've got this huge, really expensive house. They tax me too much. I shouldn't have to pay taxes. And also, this is my family home, and I shouldn't have to open it up to strangers who want to peek inside my family home. There's just like a whole litany of complaints that they are really interested in sharing. And luckily, that provides a lot of material for me, because now I kind of know like what the kind of pressing material issues are that are affecting the kind of 21st century aristocrat.
It is such a rich subject for a novel. And you know, it's so easy to laugh at these aristocrats complaining. But on the other hand, I would not trade places with them for a second. I do not envy the problem of having this crumbling mansion that you can't afford to keep. And it's not just inconvenient, but like symbolically so rich. The idea of being weighed down with these, oh my God, like millennia almost of history that is your responsibility, but also like no one cares. Like it doesn't matter to anyone but you. If I can ask a more specific question, there is a wonderful sequence in your novel where the characters go grouse hunting, and
Yeah.
this is something that like I didn't even really know was a thing people still did. You evoke grouse hunting so well, and in particular, you, to do a small spoiler, you really convincingly evoke what it's like to be accidentally shot in the face with birdshot. Did you like what was your research process for grouse hunting as an activity, or was that mostly from your imagination?
I mean, there is a lot online about because the thing is that it's very much an industry, and I mean, this is part of how Harry Percy's family makes their money, that they have this grouse moor that they sort of rent out for shooting parties, and people pay like enormous sums of money to kind of go on these shoot days. And the thing about that is that in order to make this work, they have to do a lot of advertising. And so there's really a lot of kind of adutainment, if that's a word, on like YouTube or whatever, where people will really take you through like you know, from dawn to dusk of a shoot day, because they're trying to be like, well, and if you have like 10,000 pounds and you want to spend it here at our grouse moor, you could do that. You could have this very authentic English experience. So that a lot I used and you know, there have, in terms of the medical stuff, like, you know, there are people, there are people who have had basically the same thing happen to them, you know, some of them have kind of spoken about it. Interestingly, great kind of like early 2000s reference, like it's basically what Dick Cheney did to that guy. Like, so I kind of looked at him too to kind of see how he was healing, kind of like a decade on, or you know, it's like you know, it's really something you've got to watch out for, that like if you do go on one of these grouse shoots, like you could be shot by someone swinging through the line, because I mean, when it is just like, you know, all these very wealthy men who think that they can kind of do whatever they want, they're like, I don't really have to pay that much attention to gun safety, do I? And I mean, that's like the big faux pas, is that like Harry Percy, as the sort of heir to the Grousemore, is supposed to have like absolutely impeccable manners and technique. And it is just like the most, like it would be better if he died than to like swing through the line and shoot someone in the face. Um, So it's like this terrible moment of disgrace that he's pulled a Dick Cheney.
I was indeed very much reminded of the Dick Cheney incident. Did you catch that the guy who was shot in the face by Dick Cheney, died in the last few months? And his New York Times obituary, the headline was, name of this guy, man who was shot by Dick Cheney in the face.
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that he had passed. Oh man, what
He
a
was,
way to be remembered
I
in
know,
the,
and
like, and
obviously
here I
he was
am.
obviously he was a very accomplished man because he was Dick Cheney's friend. So like he had all these achievements, but the thing he will be remembered for was being shot in the face by Dick Cheney. R.I.P. And I don't even remember his name. He's just the guy who got shot in the face
Yeah.
by Dick Cheney. Well, if I may ask a follow-up question, that sort of is a more broad, general version of what I just asked you. I'm glad that you just used the phrase authentic English experience, because actually one of the things I find so astonishing about Henry is it just feels so English to me. Now, as an American, maybe I am easily fooled by these things, but it really seems to me that you channel this English voice and this just sense of Englishness that is so convincing to me. And I know you just said that you lived in London for a while, and I'm sure that helped, but I really feel that I could live in England forever and not channel Englishness as well as you do. You seem very interested in English national identity, and it comes across in every sentence that you write. So I guess my question here is twofold. One is just like, how did you do this? Or did it just come naturally to you after living in England for a while? But two, I'm curious, like behind the scenes, were there challenges here? Like, did you keep accidentally slipping into Americanisms that you had to correct in the editing process?
Well, I'm really lucky because my partner, Kit Fryatt, is well, he's one of those people who has like a really complicated kind of backstory. And was born in one place and raised in another place, and then went to another place and then lives in another. But I guess you could say that he's English, and he really has the most finely tuned sense for those subtle differences of class and dialect within the UK, that out of anyone I've ever known. I mean, he's just astonishingly attuned to these slight differences of verbiage, or kind of the underlying attitudes beneath certain kind of exchanges. And so I mean, this whole book was kind of done in collaboration with him, because I mean, like, I was at dinner with him here in Dublin in like kind of, oh, it must have been late 2018 or something. And I had already written some kind of like vignettes, some little snippets based in this world. And I kind of was like, not, I kind of didn't really mean it, but I was like, well, what if I wrote a novel? And he was really there every step of the way to kind of advise me and to tell me like, ooh, that person really wouldn't use that word, or like this person would probably think about this issue slightly differently. So I'm lucky to have had kind of a tutor in him.
That really like satisfies my curiosity. This is something I've been wondering about for months, honestly. And I'm like, is Alan Bratton just like a sort of mimic genius for like channeling Englishness? But no, you had a consultant. That's
I've had a lot of help, yeah.
England consultant. I want to ask about another thing that has been obsessing me about this novel. If
Oh
that's
my
okay.
God. Will you let me? I don't want to take up, it's already 6:20. I want to ask you some questions about Idlewild.
Yes, go
Like,
ahead.
okay. Because like I also too have some things to ask. And one of them is like writing actors.
Mm.
This like in Henry and Idlewild, the central characters are all kind of actors with varying degrees of talent and success. And especially, I think writing bad actors is very interesting. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that kind of process of translating into a different medium, the beauty and shame of being a bad actor.
Yeah, this is an interesting point of commonality between our novels, which I think otherwise are really not that similar, but we are both drawn to actors as characters. And I think not just in Idlewild, I often like to write about actors. My favorite type of guy to write, I think, is not just an actor, but as you say, like maybe a struggling actor or an actor who is maybe not that good at acting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, there's just a very banal personal element that I have always loved and enjoyed acting myself. I am a lifelong theater kid. And my most emotionally intense periods of my life have been when I was doing a play or like angling for a role. And uh, it's not even, I mean, I love being on stage, but I think the material that I draw from when I'm writing an actor is not just like the moment when you are on stage in front of an audience, which is the best part, but like everything around that, like the things we will do, the strings we will pull, the ways we will debase ourselves and humiliate ourselves to have that chance to be on the stage in front of everybody. I think that actors, whether they do it for pleasure or as a career, are emotionally intense people. And I just love emotional intensity. I had this epiphany recently, actually, talking to my childhood best friend. She and I both loved reading when we were best friends as kids, but we had very different tastes in books. And we were comparing recently our favorite books and the books we hated as kids. And I realized like what I always was drawn to and what she always hated was emotional intensity. I have always loved just like tears on the page and like screaming and just like really, really heightened emotional states. And that was why, for example, this was in the context of Wind in the Willows never did it for me. Phantom Tollbooth never did it for me. It's because like they're so proper and British and there's no screaming, there's no emotional release. So that is why I'm drawn to actors in general. And I think everything I just said goes double, goes triple, goes 100-fold when you are talking about high school actors, because
Mhm.
high school is already such an emotionally intense time. And when you have emotionally intense theater kids, actors who are in high school and in their adolescence and already thrown together in this hothouse environment and now are fighting each other for the chance to be the star, that is a recipe for a lot of drama and comedy. So I very early on knew that I wanted to write a novel about high school theater kids. I don't think you could ask for a richer premise for an emotionally intense story that explores friendships and relationships and complicated rivalries. What about you?
Can we talk more about acting and humiliation?
Oh, yes, I'm sure I can talk about acting and humiliation. Yeah, I think that really goes hand in hand with the high school setting too for Idlewild, because what is more humiliating than adolescence, than being a teenager? I still remember it very fondly. And a lot of people who read my novel use the word cringe in a positive way, I hope. But they'll say things like, oh God, like the cringe response I had, I was remembering my high school years and just cringing. There's so much cringe in this book. Uh, I think that high school actors are very, very brave people. I really do think that. And I continue to love attending high school plays. I'll do it for fun. I have many times gone to a high school performance without knowing any kids in the cast, just because I am such a lover of high school theater, because I just think it is so fascinating to see these teens who are in the most humiliating moments of their lives. I'm sure I don't need to enumerate the reasons that high school is a humiliating time. They are, rather than trying to mitigate that humiliation, they are leaning into it. They are putting themselves out there on a stage and performing feelings. I remember my little cousin was in her high school play of The Crucible, and she told me, "Oh, you got to come to the Friday night performance because the girl playing Abigail in that on that night in that cast, she's so good. She's so good." And so I went to that performance, and not to, malign the performance of a kid, but what this little girl mostly did was screamed. She like screamed and screamed and screamed. If she had been on Broadway, I would have no trouble saying this was not a good performance. This is like not a subtle interpretation of the role as written. But at the same time, I completely understood that when you are 14 years old, as my cousin was at the time, there is just nothing more astonishing than seeing a cool older girl go on stage and just like scream and allow everyone to look at her and like let her face go red and let her voice break. I am so interested in the experience of doing that. I am interested in the psychology of wanting to do that because it is not a desire that is shared universally by teens or people in general to like break down on purpose in front of an audience. Uh, you might call it humiliating, but I think at the same time it can be very liberating. It can be a real celebration of one's strength and bravery, and it can get you a lot of social capital if you play your cards right. Though at the same time, theater kids are pretty universally mocked, so the social capital takes you only so far, and that's interesting too.
Yeah, well, there's like the social capital that is exchanged between the theater kids, and then that kind of like, exists in its own world, slightly separate from the social world of everybody else. And I'm very much like in the everybody else category. I mean, like I was kind of lightly interested in acting as a kid, because I liked playing pretend so much, but I quickly found out that like acting was not like playing pretend at all. Like there was actually this kind of what seemed to me this extraordinary limitation based on like your body or your voice or your kind of social relations to the other people in the group. And that totally kind of limited what I was able to do artistically. And so I kind of learned very early on that acting was not for me, and that if I was going to fully indulge my imagination, I would have to kind of find another outlet. So it's interesting to hear from someone who like really went down the opposite path there.
Yeah, I that's so interesting what you say about playing pretend because I'm the same as you. I loved playing pretend as a kid. Like I wanted to play pretend games long after most of my peers had outgrown them. But to me, acting was not like a way to exercise the desire to play pretend. It was my love for acting was pretty unrelated to my love for playing pretend. I think my love for playing pretend got channeled into writing fiction. That actually nowadays writing fiction feels so much more like childhood games of make believe than acting ever did. Acting, if anything, is antithetical to playing pretend. But that said, I was never a very good actor. So I maybe am not a good source on what acting feels like when it's done right. Maybe for really, really good actors, it does feel like playing pretend. But for me, it was the opposite of playing pretend. It was saying your lines and being very attuned to the requirements of reality. I suck at improv too.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things that really uh struck me about Idlewild was this kind of moment of realization that you you can't kind of satisfyingly become a man by playing a male character in a play. And I was wondering if you could talk a little more about that moment.
Yeah, it's funny on several levels. That page long, I think it's like a page long sequence in Faye's voice where she describes her excitement to play Iago in her school production of Othello, only to realize in the process of I think rehearsal that she like her desire to embody Iago is not actually going to be satisfied by the process of playing Iago. And in fact, in many ways, it will only draw her own attention to the ways in which she falls short of the male ideal that she wants to play. That passage is pretty much unchanged from the version that I wrote in the very first draft in 2017, at the time, which I did not know that I was trans. So that is one interesting artifact of what was a really long writing process. But I think perhaps that passage was a major reason that everyone in my workshop, when I workshopped that first draft at Iowa, was like, "So, how come you made Faye a trans character, but like you don't say so? What's that about?" And I was like, "What?" And I think that passage was a major reason that they thought that. Um, I guess that passage was very heartfelt. And interestingly, that was not exactly drawn from real life because I don't believe I ever had the opportunity to play a man in school. And honestly, I don't think I would have wanted to because the male roles were not the roles I was drawn to. I was a big diva and I wanted to be the star. I wanted to be the princess. I wanted to be the pretty, pretty princess. I think the closest I ever came to playing a male role was Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream, which was a good role for me, but not Mask on the level of
Yeah.
Iago should be. I think one thing I was drawing from there was my fantasy desire to play Dr. Frankenfurter in Rocky Horror, but that happened entirely inside my own head. That was not a chance I ever got to do in real life. So this is one of many things that seem on the surface like they must be autobiographical, and like they are in the sense that they're rooted in real thoughts and feelings I had, but it's more that I was generating fictional scenarios in which to explore thoughts and feelings that I was already having, which I guess is what a lot of fiction writing is. And I had a friend who read Idlewild when it came out and said, wow, we have so much in common. My high school also did Othello. And I had to tell this friend, my high school absolutely did not do Othello. And indeed, I don't believe any high school should. And what is wrong with your high school? But they did Othello.
Yeah, I mean, because that's really one of the parts of Idlewild that I was so surprised to kind of discover, the whole Othello like framing device plot. I knew that this was a novel about like the early internet and like gender and queerness, but I was really struck by how that subplot played out, because I mean, in some ways there is like a parallel in the sense of, Bottom, or Peter, is a really talented actor, that he has this capability to embody characters on the stage, and this, in the context of this production, he's kind of forced into, I mean, this extraordinarily flat role of just like black, and it's like, oh, you're black, like, we can do a framing device where you're a slave, and then that's like, it just totally extinguishes the kind of creative potential that he has. And yeah, I'd be interested in knowing kind of your process of developing that subplot also, because I found it really interesting, like the sort of the very end of the novel, when you get the kind of where are they now sequence. There's this expectation, he's like auditioning for, in the current timeline of the novel, he's auditioning for this big role, and there's this sense that he might really like break through and become the next big thing, and then at the end we find out that he's like doing kind of amateur theatricals, and it's actually like really beautiful and perfect, even though it's kind of like the video recording is bad and like the sets are awkward. There's still like this kind of, there's the sense that he is fulfilling his creative potential in maybe like a more pure way than if he had become like a big name actor.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, most talented high school actors do not become famous actors. That's just like a pure numbers game, and it would have been, I think, disingenuous to just launch him into career success. It does happen sometimes, but really, the most talented high school actor at a school with 200 people in it, that is not like known to be a performing arts high school, the odds are against the most talented kid in that school actually being the most talented young actor out there when you consider what the competition is like. So your question about the character of Bottom generally, or Peter, as you very nicely, Bottom is the other character's nickname for him, but he really does prefer to go by Peter. And I always am so touched when readers take note of that and call him by his proper name, even though his name almost never comes up in the novel. I appreciate that you picked up on that. It's actually very interesting how that character came about. And the truth is, I don't think I would attempt something like that now. If I were writing a novel now, I would be nervous to like take on this big like racial social justice topic, because I would be intimidated by the size of that topic. But it just happened pretty organically and almost accidentally in Idlewild. I wanted there to be a character who was like the best boy actor in their school. And so I instinctively modeled him after the best actor and singer that I went to school with. I'm very comfortable saying that I used this one boy as a model for this character. And I thought about like the way he talked and the way he was with others and the way there was something kind of emotionally remote about him, but so kind, but so opaque and unknowable. I was thinking about him, but in real life, that boy was white. And I thought, as I was coming up with the characters, I thought, oh, I think maybe I can't remember now if my impetus was, oh, let's diversify the cast a little, or if I specifically thought, oh, I want them to do Othello, so I'll make this character black. I forget now which idea came first, but it was really kind of an impulsive, early small decision to make this character black. And as I'm sure you discovered when writing Henry, these little small decisions that you make in the early stages, they shape where your novel goes, and you have to keep building on these original ideas and pursuing them to their logical conclusion. So like one thing led to another, and it was like, okay, so he's black, so of course he would play Othello. Well, of course, like people are going to like say weird, awkward things about the inevitability of the one black kid in school getting cast as Othello. And then I thought about, okay, the character of the drama teacher that I've set up, she is not going to be super sophisticated or sensitive on racial issues. In fact, she's probably going to do something egregiously wrong. What would she do? And I drew on some memories of like ill-advised prologues and mistakes that occurred when I was doing my own high school theater. And that sort of built on itself. And as I built this plot, then I had to constantly keep in mind, what would this feel like for Peter himself? What would this, how would this affect the way he moves through school? How would it affect his relationships with the other kids? So it ended up being an enormous part of the novel in a way that I had not originally foreseen it being. And I hope it came out okay. As with so many things that happen when we write a novel, it did end up being a much bigger deal and like a deeper topic than I had intended to grapple with. But like there it was on the page, and I felt like I had to be true to the character that I was writing about. And I guess if it had gotten to be too big, I always could have changed it and made the character white again, but that would have felt wrong because Bottom Peter was so real to me by the time I hit that point in the writing process, and I really wanted to do right by him. I'm not one of those writers who thinks that like my characters are speaking to me and exist outside of me, but they are real to me in my head, and I love them because I am God and I have created them, and I love my creations as God does. I don't know if that's really a good analogy, but I think that was how I got there. I just wanted to do right by these characters, and that ended up taking the novel in a slightly different direction than I saw it going in.
Yeah, well, I really like I completely agree that he's an opaque character, and there are these moments where the point of view characters are kind of looking to him for a reaction to various things that are going on and going like, "Ooh, now what is he going to say about this?" And then there's this kind of awareness of like, of course he knows that they are looking at him and looking at his reaction, and he has to put on the mask and kind of veil himself from these peering gazes. And I thought that was a really interesting way of, because of course, like there's never this moment where he really opens up to one of the central characters. He has his little friend group, and we're aware that like Faye and Nell are very much not a part of that. And I think it's kind of beautiful, especially in the context of high school. You can be so kind of self-centered at that age that you really don't think of other people, especially people you're not interested in, as having like full interior lives of their own. And I thought you did a really good job of kind of simultaneously showing the characters having that kind of selfish psychology, but also letting us as readers kind of peek past that and see these glimpses of interiority from the other characters and know that you know, it's like there are these windows that are opening where the characters maybe could have made a deeper connection if they had just opened up a little bit more, but then those windows kind of slide closed, and then all of a sudden it's, 5 or 10 years into the past, and then the past is the past. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think this is something we struggle with at every age in life is like remembering that other people have full interior lives of their own. But certainly it is something we struggle with a lot when we're teens. And one aphorism that I remember someone saying at the Iowa Writers Workshop is every problem in fiction is ultimately a point of view problem.
Mm.
And this was indeed a major challenge for me of writing in the first person. I have alternating first person narrators in Idlewild, and this is something I envy about writers who write their novels in the third person. And I think the next project I do will be entirely in the third person because I'm so sick of first person. But it was a challenge to stay true to the first person inside of the head of the characters I was writing from, while still communicating to the reader that the other characters who are not narrating also are in possession of their own rich inner lives. I put a lot of work into very strongly hinting to the reader that there is an entire other novel happening in the background with Peter and his friends, Lily and Jennifer, that like something really interesting is going on with the three of them. And we, the reader, don't get to see what it is because our narrators are kind of self-involved. But that doesn't mean that the other novel happening in the background is not also like a very rich and interesting story that we just don't, as readers, have access to.
Yeah, definitely. Like, definitely writing Henry, that was something that I kind of was aware of, that, like, Hal is extraordinarily self-absorbed, and I mean, there are reasons, but, he especially when it comes to, like, his siblings, he really sees, like, most of his siblings as kind of like Muppets, and he's like, "Well, they're just not, like, real people in the way that I am." And I mean, it's really difficult um to kind of hint at the characters having that. I mean, it's interesting because, like, in some ways, even though my novel is in third person, I let Hal's psychology really take over the narrative much more. Like, I did sort of submit to, like, the reality of Hal's psyche, and, like, I wasn't going to do too much as a narrator to kind of contradict his view of things.
Yes.
Um,
And actually, in fact, to me, one of the most remarkable, astonishing things about Henry is it contains a lot of scenes of what we readers would obviously call sexual abuse. But the way it is narrated, it's so locked into Hal's perspective that as you're reading it, at least I will speak for myself, as I was reading it, the sexual abuse felt unnameable and uncategorizable for a long time in the way that it does to Hal himself. Like, I read these scenes of abuse and as a reader, like have trouble like categorizing them as abuse because they don't necessarily feel to Hal in the moment like abuse. And it's just so I don't know, it's so psychologically wrenching to be locked into this POV where something is happening and it's like the Lacanian real, like
yeah.
the language is not available to the character or to the reader to categorize this experience. It's deeply disturbing and destabilizing. I am a loyal subscriber to your newsletter, so I know that you have thoughts about how to portray this kind of abuse in fiction or how it is often portrayed in fiction. And I also know from your newsletter that your thoughts have evolved and in the context of your novel, they evolved over the course of the editorial process with Brandon Taylor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, Brandon definitely gave me permission to do what I wanted to do. Like obviously there's a certain amount of trepidation going into writing a novel like this, and I had the sense that I was really walking this tightrope with regards to the depiction of abuse, because I did want it, like you said, to be totally locked into Hal's perspective. I really didn't want to kind of like take the easy way out and have this kind of omniscient narrative, coming down and being like, by the way, this is abuse and this is really bad. Like I wanted the readers to have to kind of suffer alongside Hal, in thinking, well, like this is something I'm choosing to do. This is something that I'm participating in. I am, a full agent in this scenario. And so if it's bad, it's something that I'm doing. And I maybe was a little bit decorous with the first drafts because I didn't want to be exploitative, but Brandon, I think, fully understood what I was trying to do with the novel, and with the depiction of abuse from the get-go. I was really lucky. He just absolutely understood, and he kind of gave me permission to be like, you can talk about like their cocks, you can talk about them having orgasms, like it just is what's happening. And there's no reason to kind of shy away from, or to pull a veil over what's actually happening, because it's real for the characters. And there's no getting around it, so you might as well just write about it being real.
That is incredibly good editorial advice. I'm so happy that Brandon pushed for that, because I just think he's right. And it really is such an important aspect of the novel. I think it ties into the broader thing I was curious about. In addition to these scenes of abuse, Henry also has some really good scenes of consensual sex. And when I say really good sex scenes, I don't just mean they're hot, although they are very hot, a lot of them to me, but they're good in just about every way that a literary sex scene can be good. I think they enrich our understanding of the characters. They move the story forward. Plus they're hot. Like, I just don't want to downplay. Also, just like as action scenes, they're very well written. Like, I never lose track of like where anybody's body is in relation to anyone else's body. You physicalize these scenes very well. You write a hell of a good sex scene. And I am just curious, like, do you have a philosophy of the sex scene? I feel like we sometimes get sex scene discourse, and different novelists have different relationships to like the use of sex in their work. Do you have a theory of the sex scene? What are you hoping to achieve when you write a sex scene?
I mean, I've been writing sex scenes and graphic sex and sexual violence from pretty much, I mean, that was some of the earliest stuff I was writing in terms of like actual full stories. I started kind of like around age 12, 13, actually writing stories that had a beginning, a middle, and end, and writing these kinds of things consistently. And from the beginning, I was really interested in exploring these things, and it made me contrarian, I think, starting at such an early age, because there were a lot of moments where, like, I would accidentally leave like the printout of the story I had just written in the printer, and then like someone would find it and be like, what are you writing? Like, oh my God, and really I got a lot of pressure from an early age to like stop writing about graphic sex and about sexual violence, and just write about something nicer. I was like, no, absolutely not. This is what I feel compelled to write. There's something that I have to express about these things. I don't know quite what it is, but I have to keep trying to express the inexpressible. And I think that is kind of it. What I'm still trying to do, and kind of failing to do, is take these experiences that, because they're so physical, can be so bewildering and so difficult to make sense of, and try to make some kind of sense out of them, even though I know that that's always kind of a futile effort. I mean, I really believe in like writing. I mean, and this is something that like I've kind of had to give myself permission to do, like beginning to write for an audience as opposed to just like myself and my three friends who I know will like it, is to kind of stop worrying too much about whether other people are going to think this is um sufficiently respectable or okay or valid, and just write like what is true to the characters and to the scenario, and that's really where I start from. Like and I mean it's true for everything else that I write too. That I start in the mind and the body of the character and try to experience the scene as if I am them, kind of like, you know, playing pretend. It is that kind of same impulse. But in some ways it's like it's the kind of version of playing pretend where like you're facing all of the most terrible things in the world. Like I guess the version of adult playing pretend is like where you intentionally put yourself into these scenarios that are just like the worst things about living, and about like having a human body and about being a human being, and kind of forcing yourself to live through like from A to Z in this person's skin. So you know, it's really funny though that you like say that the sex scenes are hot, because like I think that like I could write a hot sex scene like if I was really trying to, but in this book like I wanted it all to be kind of, I mean, like maybe Hal and Percy's last sex scene, like that I think was like they finally got to have like good sex. But it took them a lot. It took them a lot of time to get there. A lot of you know, a lot of effort was put into that. And a lot of, I mean, the majority of the sex, definitely I was writing with the idea that like it's really awkward, it's really embarrassing, like, you know, the pleasure isn't necessarily like unalloyed pure pleasure and joy. It's just like connecting with another human being. It's this kind of like dirty scary pleasure of like, oh, I'm really turned on by this, and like I don't know why I am, and I don't think I should be, but I just have to kind of like chase that feeling and that high. So yeah, well, I mean, and I guess like there's something kind of sexy about that.
I mean, I find abjection to be very hot. The moment at which I knew I was going to love Henry, I think this is in the second chapter. I turn the page and we have this really sad, abject sex scene between Hal and Jack Falstaff. And Falstaff is just so enthralled to Hal, who is so contemptuous of Falstaff and so disgusted by his body, but like giving himself over anyway. And I don't know, I just reading that scene, I was like, oh, I'm gonna love this novel. This is exactly what I want to be reading. This is just my favorite thing, and I'm on board for this. It's interesting. I feel like when you talk about getting past your fear of not being respectable in the sex scenes that you write in your novels, I feel like you may be touching upon a question of genre and the genre difference between erotica and literary fiction, which is something I thought about from completely the opposite perspective in Idlewild, which into which I intentionally inserted some chapters that are like parodies of the erotica genre, these fanfic chapters. But probably when you are writing good erotica as opposed to intentionally bad erotica, as I was doing for Idlewild, which is, I think, the coward's way out. I really admire people who can write good erotica. Probably when the erotica is good enough, the genre distinction falls away. And I imagine the erotica writer has similar concerns as you, the writer of literary fiction, asking himself, do I, what does the character need in this moment? What will serve the story in this moment? And the rest is just the mask that one wears, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like I luckily I've been encouraged, you know, by Brandon and by my agent and by other people, you know, in the publishing process of Henry, uh, to kind of kind of walk the walk, because I have these strong ideas and strong philosophies about exactly what you were saying, that the attempt to kind of demarcate what is tasteful and what is tasteless and what is erotica and what is literary, like all of that is completely pointless, and you just have to kind of uh, write good writing. And as long as you're chasing that, I think then it's worthwhile. And I mean, I did have to kind of well, I of course like sought permission from authority figures to do that. I kind of had to get the go ahead, but now I feel like I need to. I have a certain obligation. I think, like, having written this book now, to say it's a good artistic approach, and I encourage other people to take the same approach and to not worry too much, because I mean all of these things are so kind of like culturally historically determined as well. Like, I mean, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, people are going to have totally different ideas about these things, and they're going to be thinking about things that we haven't even begun to consider, and they're going to kind of laugh at us and go like, ah, those fools from the past, like they didn't know what they were talking about. And we just have to kind of like accept that that's our role, to kind of know nothing, and to just be happy with it.
Well, I hope you are happy with how Henry came out. I'm very happy with Henry. I really enjoyed rereading it in anticipation of today. I think we have time for one more question. Can I ask it to you?
Please go ahead.
So this is like, I don't know, this is a silly question, but I actually really do want to hear your answer to it. Hal receives so much advice over the course of the novel, and he's not very good at listening to advice. So that's why this is a silly question. But for fun, for the sake of it, what would you advise Hal? Like, if you were to give him advice on how to get his life together, what do you think he should do? What should Hal do?
That's a really interesting question because it's absolutely not one I've ever considered before. Like, absolutely fully writing this novel, I am just like, what does Hal want to do? What does Hal think he should do? And I've truly never given a moment's thought to like what I think Hal should do. I mean, probably because like I don't think I have the answers to the questions he's asking any more than he does, really. I mean, I have the advantage of, I mean, actually, when I first started to write about these characters, I was writing Hal as like a couple of years older than me. And now it's been so long that I'm older than Hal. And so now I'm kind of like the sage who can give Hal advice from my lofty heights. Uh, I would really say, I mean, the big one is he needs to quit drinking. Like it's really bad. Like definitely still kind of at the end of the novel, he doesn't worry about it too much. I mean, it would be embarrassing for him to worry if he was drinking too much, because it's simply like what he does. And yeah, I would really say like that. I mean, you're 22 now and you're already kind of like struggling. I think it's really gonna catch up with you by the time you're like 30. And so you should like get a head start and maybe like just, you don't even have to do the whole like Alcoholics Anonymous cold turkey thing. Like just maybe start paring it back gradually, slowly over the course of a longer period of time. And he can work on quitting smoking later. But I think quitting drinking is the main one.
I fully agree with that. That's such good advice. I know that Hal would not listen to you if you said that to him, but that is terrific advice for Hal and for so many of us, I think. Uh, Thank you. I think that brings us to time, unless you have any last thoughts or last gasps.
Well, I'm not going to gasp. Uh, but I think we've traveled the lands, we've inhabited other personas, we've learned about ourselves. I think now is a good time to draw it to a close.
The truth is, guys, we were given a secret code phrase to end the thing, and I have completely forgotten what it is.
It was, I think it was something like, thank you to the library for having us, which is a sentiment that I fully agree with.
I couldn't agree more.
Good, you got it, Ellen. Thank you for using my sleeper agent activation. And here I appear once again to thank you both so much for being with us here today. It's a rainy morning in Vancouverton. You both brought a lot of like light into this Zoom call, so I really appreciate that. And thank you all in the audience for joining us today from wherever you're all over the world. So we're so excited that you are all here. If you want to watch this event again, or you want to share it with your friends, this event was recorded and we will be uploading it to our YouTube channel. And Jorge will share the link for that in the chat as well. I also have a favor to ask of you. If you loved this event and want to give us some feedback, our job is to do programs that work for you. So we're going to take a minute to share a link to the form in our chat, which should be a great place that you can share some program feedback as well. And if you want to find out more events like this, follow us on social media or sign up for our email newsletter so you can stay in the loop. That's all from me today. And thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to keep the event open for a couple minutes so that you can click on some of the links that we've shared. And I encourage you all to go buy both of these books from your local independent bookstore. We've shared a link to the one here in Vancouver, but you must have one in your neighborhood that you can go to, read both of these books, and give them to all your friends so you can talk about them, because there's a lot to talk about with both of these novels. And thank you all again so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Bye.